Hi, Ivan here. So today we're going to go over the basics of setting up a vegetable garden. As you can see behind me, I just completed mine and will show you all the steps in detail that it took to complete. So, I learned this process from my grandfather who was a farmer in Sicily. He taught me a lot of this old world ways, so I took that with my own research and education, and I've been very successful in growing a variety of vegetable, herb, flower, and fruit plants over the years. I have about a 180 square foot plot reserved for my garden. If I didn't have kids, it would be much larger. It's important to choose a plot of land that will get at least 8 to 10 hours of direct sunlight every day. So for me, prepping my garden starts at the end of last year's growing season. I have the same routine every year. Once the plants are done producing, I pull them, lay them throughout the garden to decompose back into the soil, and then once the fall comes, I put a layer of leaves over the whole garden plot. Then, in the beginning of spring, after the first time I cut the grass, I spread a layer of grass clippings throughout the plot as well. And lastly, I have a large compost heap of organics such as vegetables, fruits, eggshells, flowers, coffee grounds, etc. And then I spread a layer of that throughout the garden in the very early spring. This is why for my particular application, I have to use a rototiller. There are a lot of different ideas on rototilling, should you not, and both make a lot of sense to me. But for my particular application, this is the best method which allows me to mix all those levels of compost to have a great organic medium for my plants to flourish and produce a good crop. The success of your garden and the quality of your fruit bared is largely based on the composition of your soil, as that is what is supplying the nutrients, natural occurring elements, beneficial bacteria and fungi, nematodes, other active microscopic organisms that assist in the growing process. Yeah, there's a ton of stuff in this dirt. This is why I focus on a number of composting to keep the ecosystem within the soil healthy and flourishing. Now, you don't have to have a rototiller as they can be costly, require a lot of maintenance, and have to be annoying because you got to store them somewhere every year when you only use them once. Some retail locations such as Home Depot and other hardware stores actually rent them. There are generally 4 types of tillers you can rent, from a light duty front tine all the way through a heavy duty rear tine, depending on how large your plot is or what you're trying to do. This particular one that I will use today is a medium duty front tine machine, and a similar one can be rented for about $40 to $50 at your local store. So let's quickly speak on the layout, which is also very important to the success of your garden. Plants that will become large, such as tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, and broccoli, generally require 2 to 3 foot of spacing. Your smaller plants, such as your lettuces and herbs, about 4 to 6 inches is plenty. Then there are your vine plants that run, such as your cucumbers, zucchinis, beans, and squashes. Those require a fencing system so they can crawl up to the sunlight and keep most of their fruit off the dirt to keep them more viable for as long as possible. And you'll also want to keep them a distance away from your other plants, as they will latch onto them, intertwine themselves, and crawl all the way up. So, with that being said, the next thing to consider is the sunlight. The majority of vegetable plants require 8 to 10 hours of sunlight a day. The sun rises in the east and sets in the west, so be cognizant where you put your plants in relation to the sun. By mid-season, you aren't going to want your larger plants to cast shadows on your smaller plants as the sun moves across the sky. So consider potential height and spacing before you plant. Okay, so let's get started, and I'll show you how this simple and fun process works. So all rototillers are pretty similar. As you can see here, you get run, choke, and then your different speeds. This is actually an older, probably 20-year-old rototiller. So the more you bring this up to fast is how fast the tines will go on this particular model. There's also a depth gauge. Again, this rototiller is kind of a basic one, but usually you'll be able to adjust the depth gauge, which will allow how deep the tines actually go into the dirt. This one doesn't really have that adjustment here. I can bring the wheels up and down. That's about all I have for this particular model. So again, it's very simple. You just put it on choke, you give it a couple of pulls. Once you hear the engine catch, put it on run. And again, this particular machine has an idle button. So I sped up this video for time, but when you start tilling, you want to start off with the lower to medium speeds and kind of work the machine throughout the garden. Do 2 or 3 laps. And then the laps after that, you could increase the speed every time. So that allows you to really chop up the medium, get into the dirt, and really mix up that compost. And then it starts to get really loose. And once it's really loose and almost fluffy, that's when you know that you're all set. Now, it's your first time using a tiller, they can really put some work in on you. Those tines are really trying to dig into the dirt, and it's going to pull you along. So what I like to do is I like to kind of keep my weight back on the machine. So as I'm kind of counteracting the tillers as they're digging through the dirt. And you got to be careful around corners or houses, things like that, because you don't want to chop up your vinyl siding or gutters or anything like that. So if you get close to the house, kind of slow it down, kind of take smaller steps so you have more control of the machine. So after my first round of tilling, I like to get my steel rake, just flatten out all the mounds, do a little bit more hand mixing of the leaves and the grass clippings, things of that nature. And once the dirt is pretty flat, I will then start my second round of tilling. So after using the rake to smooth out all the high spots, now with the tiller, I'm going to go it on a higher speed, as the dirt it should be a lot softer and a lot more workable at this point. And again, I'll just go through the garden 1 or 2 times just to get that nice mix going on, mix up that compost really well, and then you'll be all set. Okay, so I did a number of passes with the tiller. We have a very good medium here now. Soil mixed with all kind of organic matter, the leaves, the grass, all the compost, it's all mixed up. So the good thing about this is once you plant your vegetables throughout the growing season, this stuff will continue to break down and continue to bring nutrients, vitamins, and get all the flora and all the bacteria and fungi flourishing in this garden plot. So it's very important to always maintain some kind of compost within your garden plot. So the next step is to dig your trenches, which in turn will give you your mounds. So I have a spade hoe. I just kind of work the dirt, trying to get about 4 to 6 inches deep. I try to keep my trenches about 2 feet spaced. So once those are cut, I'll be able to form my mounds. So here I'm just measuring 2 feet from the last trench, so I know where to start my next trench with the spade. And you just work it, just run it straight down and try to keep the trenches pretty parallel. So now my steel rake, I have it at a 45-degree angle, and basically I'm pulling the dirt up from the bottom of the trench up to the top to start making the mounds. And I'll do that for both sides of the trench so I can form a nice mound. And I just continue with that throughout. So this is the finished product. It's about 5 mounds of dirt. The mounds are beneficial because they allow for drainage. As it rains, the water seeps into the valleys. And also when you plant your plants, they're elevated up in those mounds, so the sun's able to keep the roots nice and warm and keep the growth going. And also for weeding, when the weeds do come, it's a lot easier to pull them out. So I have my tomato plants going in the back 2 rows. So I laid my tape measure out and I'm spacing them about 2.5 feet. Like I said earlier, you want at least 2 to 3 feet spacing between your tomato plants, as they can easily get 5 to 6 feet mid-season. Now with my sledgehammer, I'm pounding the stakes down about 1 foot to 18 inches deep. The stakes are super important as tomato plants' stems are real floppy. The stakes allow you to tie the stem to them to give it some kind of rigidity as the plants grow. So these are some of the plants that are going in this year. Alright, over here you have your broccolis, red leaf lettuce, green leaf lettuce, different sweet pepper plants. Got your tomatoes back there. More peppers. These are the kale plants right there. San Marzano tomatoes, beefsteak tomatoes, grape, celebrity tomatoes, and an extra pepper plant right there. And these little guys are cucumbers. So I'm going to start with these, and then later on I'll get more. So the first one we're going to do is a tomato plant. This is a celebrity tomato plant. Now all these little hairs on a tomato plant are called trichomes. Those are there for the defense of the plant, to keep any insects or other harmful creatures from actually eating at that stalk. They emit like a waxy, toxic substance that the insects don't like. So all you got to do is dig down about 6 or 8 inches. There's a grub. You don't want any of these bad boys. So I always dig down 6 or 8 inches away from my stake. Okay. Now I have a mix of humus and cow manure. And I always put this in the hole first, which will give the roots a nice start to growing and expanding inside plant's new home. And then to get it out, you always just kind of squeeze the container a little bit, and it'll come right out. Alright? And then you want to tease the roots. You don't got to do much, just a little teasing of the roots right there. Okay? And put them in its new home. And like I said, with tomatoes, it doesn't really matter how deep you go. You can cover up the stalk, and it'll be just fine. Alright? After you surround it with the dirt, give it like a little press. Get it locked in place. Let's clean some of these leaves out. Alright, the next thing we're going to do is the cucumbers. These are these 2 leaf plants right here. With any kind of vines like your squashes, zucchinis, bean plants, cucumbers, you want some kind of fence built so they can crawl up towards the sunlight. If not, the vine is just going to travel all throughout your garden, start intertwining with your other plants, attaching to their stems, squeezing them. So these fences are important. They kind of keep you having the control of where the plant actually grows. Now once they get larger, they start to have these little fingerlings that kind of pop out. So once those pop out, you can grab them and actually attach them to the fence, and then the plant itself will just start to make its crawl. So I usually plant 3 plants kind of spread out here. 1 plant kind of goes this way, 1 in the middle, and 1 on the end. And again, I keep it probably 6 inches away from the actual fence. These plants actually grow extremely fast. Any kind of the squash, zucchini, cucumber plants. So again, 6-8 inches down. Got a handful of humus and cow manure. Put that in there. And in these little packets, all you gotta do is kind of squeeze them, and the plant comes out. Alright. So there's actually 2 in here, but that's fine. And now these, you don't want to bury them. You kind of want to keep them right at the top of that soil level. Alright. So they can start getting that sunlight and start doing their thing. And the same thing, pack down, tighten up that dirt. And I'll put a little bit of the humus and manure just around the plant, so as it rains, it seeps down into the roots as well. Okay. Then move over here to the middle. I forgot to mention, all these vine plants, you really don't want the fruits just laying on the dirt. Obviously the insects and other little critters can get right through them, not to mention they're going to rot a lot faster. So having the fruit actually growing on the fence is so much more beneficial, not to mention the sun can actually hit that fruit, and it'll just grow a whole lot faster. Alright, so got the cucumbers in. Alright, so I got a number of sweet peppers, cubanelle peppers, green, yellow. This is just a sweet Italian pepper right here. So again, this is all straightforward. You know, you dig 6-8 inches down, depending on how large your seedling is. Okay. Get your humus and manure in there. Just leaf out. I'm gonna scoop it out. Mix in some of the native compost and dirt. Squeeze the container, pull it right out. It's a pretty good root system already, so you want to tease those roots. Just kind of put your fingers on the bottom and just kind of work them out like that. Put that right in there. Cover it up. Now I also stake my peppers. Usually my pepper plants do get pretty big, and the fruits they produce get heavy. So if the fruits aren't spread out evenly throughout the plant, they start to tilt. So I got my stakes ready to go when that time comes. And again, you put your little tag here. I like to keep my tag so I can keep track of what plants I bought that did well and what plants didn't do well. Like I said, I buy different species of peppers and tomatoes, so I like to see how my garden does with certain plants. So keeping the tags, I know exactly what kind of pepper plant that was. Okay, so these are the broccoli plants. Broccolis actually have a very strong stem when they grow. Most plants are about 2 to 3 foot tall. I got a couple of gripes with broccoli. The biggest one is they kind of just make that first one bunch, and then you have a couple of florets, and then the plant is done. So it's kind of a lot of work and time for not much fruit, but I still like the plant. It's still a beautiful plant in the garden, so I always plant my broccoli. And the other issue is if the summer gets really hot, and the plant isn't kept cool or isn't watered, it'll actually bolt, which basically means it flowers. And once that happens, the fruit gets real like bitter. It's not a good taste, and then at that point the plant's basically done. So hopefully it'll keep it cool when the hot summer nights come on. So again, just squeeze from the bottom, it comes right out. Alright, get some more of this in there. Open up the roots a little bit. This hummus in there. Mix in some of the natural dirt. Alright, now I got the kale plants. Kale gets pretty big too. It gets about 2 to 3 foot high. So I space these in line about 2 feet apart. Now all these plants are very similar. You know, you just put the humus, the manure in the dirt. You start that. A couple of handfuls of that. Mix it with the dirt you already got. Okay. Same process for everything. Gardening is very simple. It just takes a little time. And obviously you can't be scared to get your hands dirty. Get out of there. Right. Kale has a lot of nutrients. Way more than any of the lettuces or romaines. So I always be sure to get my kale in there. Kale chips you can put in your salad. All kinds of good things with kale. People put them in their smoothies now, I guess. Alright, now I got my red and green lettuces. Generally what I do is just kind of dig a trench for them. You know, lettuces maybe 4 to 6 inches apart. They kind of grow in bunches just fine. Alright, so I got a little trench in there. It's very important to build a perimeter fence around your garden, especially depending where you live. There's a lot of critters, woodchucks, chipmunks, rabbits. They can easily decimate your garden overnight. After all that hard work, you don't want to wake up one morning and be devastated. So make sure you do a good job protecting your garden from the wildlife. I do understand nature will always get its cut, but do your best to try to keep them at bay. So that's the finished garden. We have good spacing, good mounds for drainage and heat, and everything was fertilized with natural cow manure and humus. This is an organic garden. I don't use any fertilizers, pesticides, nothing like that, because I don't want to consume that. And then most importantly is putting a fence to protect what you have. Very simple, and as the spring and summer goes, you're going to have a lot of nice vegetables and fruit to enjoy. So that's the basics of creating a garden. It only costs about $25 in the actual plants, maybe $15 in cow manure, and just a lot of dirty hands, and I have a beautiful garden to enjoy for spring, summer, and early fall. So, if you're into construction projects, home repair, tool reviews, gardening, landscaping, DIY, do me a favor, subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching. I appreciate your time.